Okay. I think we're live. Maybe, maybe. The only way to find out is to quickly check all the requisite places. And yes, according to X, the most important site on the internet, we are live. Which probably means we're live on YouTube as well and Rumble. I don't have a whole lot of time today to read. My morning is pretty crammed. So we're going to get right to it without a lot of fanfare. I'm going to give it another minute and a half to basically bring us up to speed. We are reading The King of Elfland's Daughter, which you can see here. That particular edition is the Ballantine Books edition, which published, Ballantine or Del Rey, it looks like. The cover is as you see it on the screen. And it's the one that has the introduction by Neil Gaiman, regardless of what you think of him. That one is at least an edition that can be trusted. There are indie published versions of this, since the story is not it's in the public domain, that have mistakes and their own little issues. I have a version that I ordered before this one that had AI art and technical mistakes across the board. It's not very good. Hope all y'all's mornings is good. Like I said, things are kind of busy, so I don't know how much I'm going to get through, or if I'm going to get through the full hour. But we should start. And where we're starting today is chapter 12, The Unenchanted Plain. If you'll recall, when last we did this, the last couple times, we have a hero, Alveric, who went to Elfland and stole away Lyrazel, the King of Elfland's daughter, as the title of the book would suggest. He steals her away, brings her back to the lands that we know, and they are wed, and they have a child who they name Orion, because Lyrazel appreciates the stars, and that's the compromise they can make. And then in the last section, she tried to get to understand the human ways, the ways of law and Christendom, and couldn't quite get into it. The rites and all those were just really confusing to her, and Alveric was frustrated. And she would thank the stars for their help, and he would be like, no, 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 we must not do that. That is pagan. That's heathen. Meanwhile, the king of Elfland himself, excuse me, he created a rune and sent a troll with that rune to meet up with Lyrazel. And the troll gave her this rune that seemed to have some big power to it, but she would not look at it. And the troll returned, and eventually the inability to mesh with human life got to her, and she read from the rune and disappeared in the autumn leaves. And Alveric went after her, chased after her, ran to Elfland, but Elfland was gone. It had ebbed away. And Orion, the child, went to the villages to learn about the hunt. And that's where we kind of pick up here at chapter 12, The Unenchanted Plain. Give me 1 second, folks. It's just taking a little extra longer to get the voice in order. When Alveric understood that he had lost Elfland, it was already evening, and he had been gone 2 days and a night from Earl. For the second time he lay down for the night on that shingly plain whence Elfland had ebbed away, and at sunset the eastern horizon showed clear against turquoise sky, all black and jagged with rocks, without any sign of Elfland. And the twilight glimmered, but it was Earth's twilight. It was Earth's twilight, and not that dense barrier for which Alveric looked, which lies between Elfland and Earth. and the stars came out, and the stars came out, and were the stars we know, and Alveric slept below their familiar constellations. He awoke in the birdless dawn, very cold, hearing old voices crying faintly far off, as they slowly drifted away, like dreams going back to dreamland. He wondered if they would come to Elfland again, or if Elfland had ebbed too far. He searched all the horizon eastwards, and still saw nothing but the rocks of that desolate land. So he turned again towards the fields we know. He walked back through the cold with all his impatience gone, and gradually some warmth came to him from walking, and later a little from the autumnal sun. He walked all the day, and the sun was growing huge and red when he came again to the leather worker's cottage. He asked for food, and the old man made him welcome. His pot was already simmering for his own evening meal, and it was not long before Alveric was sitting at the table, the old table before a dish full of squirrels' legs, hedgehogs, and rabbits' meat. The old man would not eat till Alveric had eaten, but waited on him with such solicitude that Alveric felt that the moment of his opportunity was come, and turned to the old man as he offered him a piece of the back of a rabbit, and approached the subject of Elfland. "The twilight is further away," said Alveric. "Yes, yes," said the old man, without any meaning in his voice, whatever he had in his mind. "When did it go?" said Alveric. "The twilight, master?" said his host. "Yes," said Alveric. "Ah, the twilight," the old man said. "The barrier," said Alveric, and he lowered his voice, although he knew not why, "between here and Elfland." At the word Elfland, all comprehension faded out of the old man's eyes. "Ah," he said. "Old man," said Alveric, "you know where Elfland has gone." "Gone?" said the old man. That innocent surprise, thought Alveric, must be real. But at least he knew where it had been. It used to be only 2 fields away from his door. Elfland was in the next field once. And the old man's eyes roved back into the past, and he gazed, as it were, on an old days a while. And then he shook his head, and Alveric fixed him with his eye. "You knew Elfland," he exclaimed. "Oh, no. You knew Elfland," he exclaimed. Still the old man did not answer. "You knew where the border was," said Alveric. "I am old," said the leather worker, "and I have no one to ask." When he said that, Alveric knew that he was thinking of his old wife, and he knew, too, that she had been alive and standing there at the moment, yet he would have had no news of Elfland. There seemed little more to say, but a certain petulance held him to the subject after he knew it to be hopeless. "Who lives to the east of here?" he said. "To the east?" the old man replied. "Master, are there not north and south and west, that you needs must look to the east?" There was a look of entreaty in his face, but Alveric did not heed it. "Who lives to the east?" he said. "Master, no one lives to the east," he answered. And that indeed was true. "What used to be there?" said Alveric. And the old man turned away to see to the stewing of his pot, and muttered as he turned, so that one hardly heard him. "The past," he said. No more would the old man say, nor explain what he had said, so Alveric asked him if he could have a bed for the night, and his host showed him the old bed he remembered across that vague number of years, and Alveric accepted the bed without more ado, so as to let the old man go to his own supper. And very soon Alveric was deep asleep, warm and resting at last, while his host turned over slowly in his mind many things of which Alveric had supposed he knew nothing. When the birds of our fields woke, Alveric, singing late in the last of October, on a morning that reminded them of spring, he rose and went out of doors, and went to the highest part of the little field that lay on the windowless side of the old man's house, toward Elfland. There he looked eastward, and saw all the way to the curved line of the sky the same barren, desolate, rocky plain that had been there yesterday and the day before. Then the leather worker gave him breakfast, and afterwards he went out and looked again at the plain, and over his dinner, which his host timidly shared, Alveric neared once more the subject of Elfland, and something in the old man's sayings or silences made Alveric hopeful that even yet he would have some news of the whereabouts of the pale blue elfin mountains. So he brought the old man out and turned to the east, to which his companion looked with reluctant eyes, and pointing to one particular rock, the most noticeable and near, said, hoping for definite news of a definite thing, How long has that rock been there? And the answer came to his hopes like hail to apple blossoms. It is there, and we must make the best of it. The unexpectedness of the answer dazed Alveric, and when he saw that reasonable questions about definite things brought him no logical answer, he despaired of getting practical information to guide his fantastic journey. So he walked on the eastward side of the cottage all afternoon, watching the dreary plain, and it never changed or moved. No pale blue mountains appeared, no Elfland came flooding back, and evening came, and the rocks glowed dully with the low rays of the sun, and darkened when it set, changing with all earth's changes, but with no enchantment of Elfland. Then Alveric decided on a great journey. He returned to the cottage and told the leather worker that he needed to buy much provisions, as much as he could carry, and over supper they planned what he should have. And the old man promised to go the next day amongst the neighbors, telling of all the things he would get from each, and somewhat more if God should prosper his snaring, for Alveric had determined to travel eastward till he found the lost land. And Alveric slept early, and slept long, till the last of his fatigue was gone, which came from his pursuit of Elfland. The old man woke him as he came back from his snaring, and the creatures that he had snared the old man put in his pot, and hung it over his fire, while Alveric ate his breakfast. And all the morning the leather worker went from house to house amongst his neighbors, dwelling on little farms at the edge of the fields we know. And he got salted meats from some, bread from one, a cheese from another, and came back burdened to his house in time to prepare dinner. And all the provender that burdened the old man Alveric shouldered in a sack, and some he put in his wallet, and he filled his water bottle and 2 more besides, that his host had made from large skins, for he had seen no streams at all in the desolate land, and thus equipped he walked some way from the cottage, and looked again at the land from which Elfland had ebbed. He came back satisfied that he could carry provisions for a fortnight. And in the evening, while the old man prepared pieces of squirrel's meat, Alveric stood again on the windowless side of the cottage, gazing still across the lonely land, hoping always to see emerge from the clouds that were coloring at sunset those serene pale blue mountains, and seeing never a peak. And the sun set, and that was the last of October. Next morning, Alveric made a good meal in the cottage, then took his heavy burden of provisions, and paid his host, and started. The door of the cottage opened toward the west, and the old man cordially saw him away from his door, with Godspeed and farewells, but he would not move around his house to watch him going eastward, nor would he speak of that journey. It was as though to him there were only 3 points of the compass. The bright autumnal sun was not yet high when Alveric went from the fields we know to the land that Elfland had left, and that nothing else went near. With his big sack over his shoulder and his sword at his side, the May trees of memory that he had seen were all withered now, and the old songs and voices that had haunted that land were all now faint as sighs, and there seemed to be fewer of them, as though some had already died or had struggled back to Elfland. All that day Alveric traveled with the vigor that awaits at the beginning of journeys, which helped him on through. All that day Alveric traveled with the vigor that waits at the beginning of journeys, which helped him on though he was burdened with so much provisions, and a big blanket he wore like a heavy cloak around his shoulders, and he carried beside a bundle of firewood, and a stave in his right hand. He was an incongruous figure with his stave and his sack and his sword, but he followed one idea, one inspiration, one hope, and so shared something of the strangeness that all men have who do this. One thing that just dawned on me, and it's kind of a big thing. Where the heck's his kid? Orion. Like, he's just going on this journey without his kid. I may be wrong in the amount of time that has passed, because time is very flowy here, but wouldn't he want Orion to go with him? I don't know. A point of clarification here. I am reading this completely fresh and blind. Every new sentence is a new sentence for me. So it's new to me. I don't know what's in store. So I'm very excited for that. But it is weird that Alveric is just like, Not forget my child. Let's go find my honey. I mean, I guess that makes sense. I can. Yeah, that makes sense. I guess. Just it's just weird to read. Um, Halting at noon to eat and rest, he went slowly on again and walked till evening. Even then he did not rest as he had intended. For when twilight fell and lay heavy along the eastern sky, he continually rose from his resting and went a little further to see if it might not be that dense deep twilight that made the frontier of the fields we know, shutting them off from Elfland. But it was always earthly twilight until the stars came out, and they were all the familiar stars that took on earth. Then he lay down among those unrounded and mossless rocks, and ate bread and cheese and drank water. And as the cold of night began to come over the plain, he lit a small fire with his scanty bundle of wood, and lay close to it, with his cloak and his blanket around him. And before the embers were black, he was sound asleep. Dawn came without sound of bird or whisper or leaves of grass. Dawn came in dead silence and cold, and nothing on all that plain gave a welcome back to the light. If darkness had lain forever upon those angular rocks, it were better, Alveric thought, as he saw their shapeless companies sullenly glowing. Darkness were better now that were darkness were better now that Elfland was gone. And though the misery of that disenchanted place entered his spirit with a chill of the dawn, yet his fiery hope still shone, and gave him little time to eat, by the cold black circle of his lonely fire before it hurried him onward, easterly over the rocks. And all that morning he traveled on without the comradeship of a blade or grass. And all that morning he traveled on without the comradeship of a blade of grass. The golden birds that he had seen before had long since fled back to Elfland, and the birds of our fields and all living things we know shunned all that empty waste. Alveric traveled as much alone as a man who goes back in memory to revisit remembered scenes, and instead of remembered scenes he was in a place from which every glamour had gone. He traveled somewhat lighter than on the day before, but he went more wearily, for he felt more heavily now the fatigue of the previous day. He rested long at midday, and then went on. The myriad rocks stretched on and slightly jagged at the horizon, and all day there came no glimpse of the pale blue mountains. That evening, from his dwindling provision of wood, Alveric made another fire. Its little flame going up alone in that waste seemed somehow to reveal the monstrous loneliness. He sat by his fire and thought of Lyrazel, and would not give up hope, though a glance at those rocks might have warned him not to hope, for something in their chaotic look partook of the plain that bred them, and they hinted it to be infinite. Chapter 13. The Reticence of the Leatherworker. Excuse me. Huh. Morning reads when the voice is waking up is a little bit of a challenge. I have to switch my times for doing these. It was many days before Alveric learned from the monotony of the rocks that one day's journey was the same as another, and that by no number of journeys would he bring any change to his rugged horizons, which were all drearily like the ones they replaced, and never brought a view of the pale blue mountains. He had gone, while his fortnight's provisions grew lighter and lighter, for 10 days over the rocks. It was now evening, and Alveric understood at last that if he traveled further, and failed soon to see the peaks of the Elfin mountains, he would starve. So he ate his supper sparingly in the darkness, his bundle of firewood having long since been used, and abandoned the hope that had led him. And as soon as there was any light at all to show him where the east was, he ate a little of what he had saved from his supper, and started his long tramp back to the fields of men, over rocks that seemed all the harsher because his back was to Elfland. All that day he ate and drank little, and by nightfall he had still left full provisions for 4 more days. He had hoped to travel faster during these last days, if he should have to turn back, because he would travel lighter. He had given no thought to the power of those monotonous rocks to weary and to depress with their desolation, when the hope that had somewhat illumined their grimness was gone. He had thought little of turning back at all, till the 10th evening came and no pale blue mountains, and he suddenly looked at his provisions, and all the monotony of his homeward journey was broken only by occasional fears that he might not be able to come to the fields we know. The myriad rocks lay larger and thicker than the tombstones, and not so carefully shaped, yet the waste had the look of the graveyard stretching over the world with unrecording stones above nameless heads. Chilled by the bitter nights, guided by blazing sunsets, he went on through the morning mists and the empty noons and weary birdless evenings. Oh, man, this is kind of rough. I am already despairing myself. More than a week went by since he had turned, and the last of his water was gone, and still he saw no sign of the fields we know, or anything more familiar than rocks that he seemed to remember, and which would have misled him northward, southward, or eastward, were it not for the red November sun that he followed, and sometimes some friendly star. And then at last, just as the darkness fell blackening that rocky multitude, there showed westward over the rocks, pale at first against remnants of sunset. There showed westward over the rocks, pale at first against remnants of sunset, but growing more and more orange, a window under one of the gables of man. Alvric rose and walked toward it till the rocks in the darkness and weariness overcame him, and he lay down and slept. And the little yellow window shone into his dreams, and made forms of hope as fair as any that came from Elfland. The house that he saw in the morning when he woke seemed impossible to be the one whose tiny light had held out hope and helped to him in loneliness. It seemed now too plain and common. He recognized it for a house not far from one of the leather worker. Soon he came to a pool and drank. He came to a garden in which a woman was working early, and she asked him whence he had come. "From the east," he said, and pointed, and she did not understand. And so he came again to the cottage from which he had started, to ask once more for hospitality from the old man, who had housed him twice. He was standing in his doorway as Alvric came, walking wearily, and again he made him welcome. He gave him milk and then food, and Alvric ate, and then rested all the day. It was not till evening he spoke, but when he had eaten and rested, and he was at the table again, and supper was now before him, and there was light and warmth, he felt all at once the need of human speech, and then he poured out the story of that great journey over the land, where the things of man ceased, and where yet no birds or little beasts had come, or even flowers, a chronicle of desolation. And the old man listened to the vivid words and said nothing, making some comments of his own, only when Alvric spoke of the fields we know. He heard with politeness, but said never a word of the land from which Elfland had ebbed. It was indeed as though all the land of the east were delusion, and as though Alvric had been restored from it, or had awoken from a dream, and were now among reasonable daily things. And there was nothing to say of the things of dream. Certainly never a word would the old man say in recognition of Elfland, or of anything 80 yards east of his cottage door. Then Alvric went to his bed, and the old man sat alone till his fire was low, thinking of what he had heard, and shaking his head. And all the next day Alvric rested there, or walked in the old man's autumn-smitten garden, and sometimes he tried again to speak with his host of his great journey to the desolate land, but got from him no admission that such lands were, checked always by his avoidance of the topic, as though to speak of these lands might bring them nearer. This is quite dire, I must admit. If this is being made to make me despair, it is succeeding. Poor Alvric. And Alvric pondered on many reasons for this. Had the old man been to Elfland in his youth and seen something he greatly feared, perhaps barely escaping from death or an age-long love? Was Elfland a mystery too great to be troubled by human voices? Did these folk dwelling there, at the edge of our world, know well the unearthly beauty of all the glories of Elfland, and fear that even to speak of them might be a lure to draw them whither their resolution barely perhaps held them back? Or might a word said of the magical land bring it nearer, to make it fantastic and elvish, the fields we know? To all these ponderings of Alvric, there was no answer. And yet one more day Alvric rested, and after that he set out to return to Earl. He set out in the morning, and his host came with him out of his doorway, saying farewell, and speaking of his journey home, and of the affairs of Earl, which were food for gossip over many farmlands. And great was the contrast between the good man's approval that he showed thus for the fields we know, over which Alvric journeyed now, and his disapproval for those other lands whither Alvric's hopes still turned. And they parted, and the old man's farewells dwindled, and then he turned back into his house, rubbing his hands contentedly as he slowly went, for he was glad to see one who had looked toward the fantastic lands turn now to a journey across the fields we know. In those fields the frost was master, and Alvric walked over the crisp gray grass and breathed the clean, fresh air, thinking little of his home or his son, but planning how even yet he might come to Elfland, for he thought that further north there might be a way, coming round perhaps behind the pale blue mountains, that Elfland had ebbed too far for him to overtake it. There he felt despairingly sure, but scarcely believed it had gone along the entire frontier of twilight, where Elfland touches earth as far as poet has sung. Further north he might find the frontier, unmoved, lying sleepy with twilight, and come under the pale blue mountains, and see his wife again. Full of these thoughts, he went over the misty mellow fields. And full of his dreams and plans about that phantasmal land, he came in the afternoon to the woods that brood above Earl. He entered the wood, and deep though he was among the thoughts that were far from there, he soon saw the smoke of a fire a little ways off, rising grey among the dark oak boles. He went towards it to see who was there, and there were his son and Zerundarel warming their hands at the fire. "Where have you been?" called Orion as soon as he saw him. "Upon a journey," said Alveric. "Oh, this hunting," Orion said, and he pointed in the direction whence the wind was fanning the smoke. And Zerundarel said nothing, for she saw more in Alveric's eyes than any question of hers could have drawn from his tongue. Then Orion showed him a deerskin on which he was sitting. "Oth shot it," he said. There seemed to be a magic all around that fire of big logs, quietly smoldering in the woods upon Autumn's discarded robe that lay brilliant there. And it was not the magic of Elfland, nor had Zerundarel called it up with her wand. It was only a magic of the wood's very own. And Alveric stood there for a little while in silence. Watching the boy and the witch by their fire in the woods, and understanding that the time was come when he must tell Orion things that were not clear to himself, and that were puzzling him even now. Yet he did not speak of them then, but saying something of the affairs of Earl, turned and walked on toward his castle, while Zerundarel and the boy came back later with Oth. And Alveric commanded supper when he came to his gateway, and ate it alone in the great hall that there was in the castle of Earl. And all the while he was pondering words to say. And then he went in the evening up to the nursery, and told the boy, now his mother was gone for a while, to Elfland, to her father's palace, which may only be told of in song. And unheeding any words of Orion then, he held on with the brief tale that he had come to tell, and told how Elfland was gone. "But that cannot be," said Orion, "for I hear the horns of Elfland every day." You can hear them?" Alveric said. And the boy replied, "I hear them blowing at evening." Okay, hold on. So, did Alveric so screw things up that they banned him from Elfland? I hope that's not the case. I feel like it was just a misunderstanding, or rather, just kind of a lack of connection. I mean, if she's elf kind and he's humankind, I don't know. Like, I desperately want them. I want Elveric to find Lyrazel again. I do. I desperately want this. Let's continue on. Let's see. I have a little bit of time, maybe enough time for another chapter. This is going to be a shorter one today, I think, unfortunately, just because work's settling in and piling up. Chapter 15, The Quest for the Elfin Mountains. Winter descended on Earl and gripped the forest, holding the small twigs stiff and still. In the valley, it silenced the stream, and in the fields of the oxen, the grass was brittle as earthenware, and the breath of the beasts went up like the smoke of encampments. And Orion still went to the woods whenever Oth would take him, and sometimes he went with Threll. When he went with Oth, the wood was full of the glamour of the beasts that Oth hunted, and the splendor of the great stag seemed to haunt the gloom of far hollows. But when he went with Threll, a mystery haunted the wood, so that one could not say what creature might not appear, nor what haunted and hid by every enormous bole. What beasts there were in the wood, even Threll did not know. Many kinds fell to his subtlety, but who knew if these were all? And when the boy was late in the wood, on happy evenings, he would always hear as the sun went blazing down, rank on rank, of the elfin horns blowing far away eastwards in the chill of the coming dusk, very far and faint, like reveille heard in dreams, far beyond. From beyond the woods they sounded, all those ringing horns from beyond the downs, far over the furthest curve of them, and he knew them for the silver horns of Elfland. In all other ways he was human, and but for his power to hear those horns of Elfland, whose music rings but a yard beyond human hearing, and his knowledge of what they were, but for these two things, he was as yet not more than a human child. And now the horns of Elfland blew over the barrier of twilight, to be heard by any ear in the fields we know. I cannot understand. Sorry, and how the horns of Elfland blew over the barrier of twilight, to be heard by any ear in the fields we know. I cannot understand. Yet Tennyson speaks of them as heard faintly blowing, even in these fields of ours, and I believe that by accepting all that the poets say, while duly inspired, our errors will be fewest. So, though science may deny or confirm it, Tennyson's line shall guide me here. Interesting. I have not read Tennyson. I should mark this down, actually. Going to do a thing to a book, and I don't know how you feel about the sanctity of books themselves, but I'm going to underline a thing in the book to look at later. First, let me get some water. For those just joining, I'm underlining a thing I need to look up later. Yet Tennyson speaks of them as heard faintly blowing, even in these fields of ours. And I believe that by accepting all that the poets say while duly inspired, our errors will be fewest. Interesting. A bit of author injection here, and I'm very curious to see what that means, or what what kind of let's just see what that means. We'll see it later. I'll enlighten in later streams maybe. Alveric in those days went through the village of Earl, with his thoughts far from there, moodily, and he stopped at many doors and spoke and planned, with his eyes always fixed, as it seemed, on things no one else could see. He was brooding on far horizons, and the last over which was Elfland, and from house to house he gathered a little band of men. We're getting a posse together, and we're going to go find my wife. Sorry, I keep getting texted. It was Alveric's dream to find the frontier further north, to travel on over the fields we know, always searching new horizons, till he came to some place from which Elfland had not ebbed. To this he determined to dedicate his days. When Lyrazel was with him amongst the fields we know, his thoughts had ever been to make her more earthly. Okay, there's the problem. But now that she was gone, the thoughts of his own mind were becoming daily more elvish, and folk began to look sideways at his fantastic mien. Dreaming always of Elfland and of elvish things, he gathered horses and provender, and made for his little band so huge a store of provisions that those who saw it wondered. Many men asked to be of that curious band, and few would go with him to haunt horizons, when they heard whither he went. And the first that he found to be of that band was a lad that was crossed in love, and then a young shepherd, well used to lonely spaces, then one that had heard a curious song that someone sang one evening. It had set his thoughts roving away to impossible lands, and so he was well content to follow his fancies. One huge full moon one summer had shone all a warm night long on a lad as he lay in the hay, and after that he had guessed or seen things that he had said to the moon showed it. Let me back up. One huge full moon one summer had shone all a warm night long on a lad as he lay in the hay, and after that he had guessed or seen things that he had said the moon showed him. Whatever they were, none else saw such things in Earl. He also joined Alveric's band as soon as he asked him. It was many days before Alveric found these four, and more he could not find, but a lad that was quite witless, and he took him to tend the horses, for he understood horses well, and they understood him, though no human man or woman could make him out at all, except his mother, who wept when Alveric had his promise to go, for she said that he was the prop and support of her age, and knew what storms would come, and when the swallows would fly, and what colors of flowers would come up from seeds she sowed in her garden, and where spiders would build their webs, and the ancient fables of flies. She wept, and said there would be more things lost by his going than ever folk guessed in Earl. But Alveric took him away. Many go thus. And one morning 6 horses leaped and hung with provisions all round. And one morning 6 horses heaped and hung with provisions all around their saddles, waited at Alvric's gateway, with the 5 men that were to roam with him as far as the world's edge. He had taken long counsel with Zorundril, but she said that no magic of hers had power to charm Elfland, or to cross the dread will of its king. He therefore commended Orion to her care, knowing well that though hers was but simple or earthly magic, yet no magic likely to cross the fields we know, nor curse nor rune directed against his boy, would be able to thwart her spell. And for himself he trusted to the fortune that waits at the end of a long weary journey. To Orion he spoke long, not knowing how long that journey might be before he again found Elfland, nor how easily he might return across the frontier twilight. He asked the boy what he desired of life. "To be a hunter," said he. "What will you hunt while I'm over the hills?" said his father. "Stags, like oath," said Orion. Alvric commended that sport, for he himself loved it. "And some day I will go a long way over the hills and hunt stranger things," said the boy. "What kind of things?" asked Alvric, but the boy did not know. His father suggested different kinds of beasts. No, stranger than them," said Orion. "Stranger even than bears." "But what will they be?" asked his father. "Magic things," said the boy. But the horses moved restlessly down below in the cold, so that there was no time for more idle talk, and Alvric said farewell to the witch and his son, and strode away thinking little of the future, for all was too vague for thought. Alvric mounted his horse over the heaps of provisions, and all the band of 6 men rode away. The villagers stood in the street to see him go. All knew their curious quest, and when all had saluted Alvric, and all had called their farewells to the last of their riders, a hum of talk arose, and in the talk was contempt of Alvric's quest, and pity, and ridicule, and sometimes affection spoke, and sometimes scorn, yet in the hearts of all there were envy, for their reason mocked the lonely roving of that outlandish adventure, but their hearts would have gone. And away rode Alvric out of the village of Earl, with his company of adventurers behind him, a moonstruck man, a madman, a lovesick lad, a shepherd boy, and a poet. And Alvric made Vand, the young shepherd, the master of his encampment, for he deemed him to be the sanest among his following. But there were disputes at once, as they rode, before they came to make any encampment, and Alvric, hearing or feeling the discontent of his men, learned that on such a quest as his, it was not the sanest, but the maddest that should be given authority. So he named Niv, the witless lad, the master of his encampment, and Niv served him well till a day that was far thence, and the moonstruck man stood by Niv, and all were content to do the bidding of Niv, and all honored Alvric's quest. And many men in numerous lands do saner things with less harmony. What an interesting thing. Okay, so on a journey to try and find Elfland across a desolate plain, the sanest person on the journey shouldn't manage the camp, but the wildest or the most witless. It's an interesting visual, or an interesting idea. They came to the uplands and rode over the fields, and rode till they came to the furthest hedges of men, and to the houses that they have built at the verge, beyond which even their thoughts refused to fare. Through this line of houses at the edge of those fields, 4 or 5 in every mile, Alfric went with his queer company. The leather worker's hut was far to the south. Now he turned northward to ride past the backs of the houses, over fields through which once the barrier twilight had run, till he should find some place where Elfland might seem not to have ebbed so far. He explained this to his men, and the leading spirits, Niv and Zend, who was moonstruck, applauded at once, and Thil, the young dreamer of songs, said the scheme was a wise one too, and Vand was carried away by the keen zeal of these 3, and it was all one to Rannoch, the lover, and they had not gone far along the backs of the houses when the red sun touched the horizon, and they hastened to make an encampment by what remained of the light of that short winter's day, and Niv said that they should build a palace like those of kings, and the idea fired Zen to work like 3 men, and Thil helped him eagerly, and they set up stakes and stretched blankets upon them, and made a wall of brushwood, for they were but just outside the hedgerows, and Van helped too with rough hurdles, and Rannoch toiled unwearily, and when all was finished Niv said that it was a palace, and Alvric went in and rested, while they lit a fire outside, and Van cooked a meal for them all, which he did every day for himself upon lonely downs, and none could have cared for the horses better than Niv. And as the gloaming faded away, the cold winter grew, and by the time that the first star shone, there seemed nothing in all the night but bitter cold. Yet Alvric's men lay down by their fire and their leathers and furs and slept, all but Rannoch the lover. To Alveric lying on furs in his shelter, watching red embers glowing beyond dark shapes of his men, the quest promised well. He would go far north, watching every horizon for any sign of Elfland. He would go by the border of the fields we know, and always be near provisions. And if he got no glimpse of the pale blue mountains, he would go on, till he found some field from which Elfland had not ebbed, and so come round behind them. And Niv and Zend and Thil had all sworn to him that evening that before many days were gone, they would surely all find Elfland. Upon this thought he slept. The next chapter's chapter 9, The Retreat of the Elf King. Sorry, chapter 15. Did I say 15 before? I meant 14. Last chapter was 14. This one's 15. The Retreat of the Elf King, which we'll have to do next time. It's a little bit of a shorter read this time, and I'm sad of it. And I'm also intrigued because the last stream we did was very interesting because that featured the king of Elfland making that rune, sending the troll, which was really funny. The troll chapter was hilarious. The troll takes the rune from the Elf King, and he just kind of somersaults his way through the lands we know, and really fixates on how terrible dogs are because they're forces of law. But this one's kind of a downer. Like, Alveric looks and looks and looks and cannot find Elfland. It has ebbed so far. The journey feels fraught and hopeless. But then he forms a party. That's the interesting thing. And I feel like as I'm reading this, I can see echoes of this in future works from other authors. But yeah, this party, and even the way that Lord Dunsany mentions how he introduces these guys. He doesn't introduce them by name at first. He introduces them as their title or what they are, a description for them, which is very much like Canterbury Tales, where you have like the miller, the Lord of Bath's wife, the miller, the knight, things like that. Like they have titles for them, and from those titles we learn about the character, and the name feels secondary, if only for a shorter means to refer to them. Oh, this is fascinating. We have still a little bit to go here. Let me just put me back into the full screen. We have a little bit, quite a bit left, actually, which I'm hoping in the next time, maybe Thursday stream, I can start, go a little bit longer. Yeah, I want him to find Lyrazel, but also this mystery of this ebbed Elfland, and the fact that Orion can still hear the horns, and he wants to hunt stranger things in strange lands. How that all ties together, I have not a guess. Anyways, I'm gonna leave it there. This was a little bit more rambly, a little bit shorter. I hope it was enjoyable. I've mentioned before that this isn't supposed to be really an audiobook or a performance, more so as a reading from a book club. My ideal format for a book club in general is to not do much in the way of prep and to just gather together with people you know and read out loud. Engage in the act of reading among each other and stop when things are interesting. Stop to talk about things. Whatever grabs your fancy is worthy to interrupt the reading, but continue to read. Already reading can be such a solitary thing, but to turn it into something more communal is exciting. And that's kind of the purpose of these streams in general, is to bring anyone who wants to in on the act of reading. You're hearing me read, but I hope then that you would turn around and read to others. Read to family, friends, gather together, read out loud. The very first thing I did was The Green Knight, Sir Gawain and the Green Knight, or Gawain and the Green Knight, however you pronounce it. I read that out loud, and that was very pleasurable. And then Frankenstein, reading that was also very pleasurable. The reading, despite any imperfections, is really fun. Out loud, that is. Anyways, that's about as soapboxy as I want to get there. God, I really want to know what happens. If I didn't have to jump right to work, I would be continuing to read this as long as I possibly could. And with that, I'm going to bid us a farewell, and I will see you guys in online, on X, on any number of other videos or streams or whatever comes out next. You can find me on X, Movie Guy John. I have some movie reviews that I've got to record. I've got some that I've written. And yeah, I'll see you guys around.